Hey, thanks for checking out this video on learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in a short amount of time. Learning web design is going to be profitable in any area of your career and any area of your life too if you really enjoy working on web design and that's what you do for a living. So in this short video, I will show you how you can learn the basics of web design in a short amount of time. But I also want to let you know about a project that I've been working on called SaaS Adventure. You can check it out at saasadventure.io, and it is a 21-day program where you can learn to create your own software as a service. So this means you can create a software as a service where other people can pay you a certain amount every month to use your service. It's a great way to become financially free and really just continue to work on what you love and make a great living from it. So be sure to check it out at saasadventure.io, and without further ado, let's jump into learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, so before we can start writing some code, we need to use a text editor. And you can just Google any kind of text editor. If we were to Google text editor, we see that we have a few up here. Sublime Text is very popular, but one that I'm going to use throughout this video is called VS Code. So you can Google VS Code. You can go here and you can click on download for Mac or PC or whichever operating system that you are using. So let's go ahead and jump into talking about HTML. So we already have our editor. I'm just going to create a new folder on my desktop and I will just title this HTML. And I'm going to drag this folder into my text editor, which is Visual Studio Code. Okay, so now I need to create a new file. And I'm going to name this new file index.html. And whenever you create an HTML file, you need to end it with an extension of .html. And doing that will let the web browser know that, hey, this is an HTML file. So inside of our index.html, I can simply type out something like hello world. And if I were to save that, and if I open this up, by double clicking it, you can see that it gets opened up in a browser and we get a message that says hello world. And this is our first homepage that we just created. And you can see it's that easy. It is simply a text file that opens up in a browser and gets displayed as a web page. Of course, this is not proper HTML syntax, so we will need to give proper syntax for our HTML document. And to do that, we start off every document with the exclamation doctype HTML enclosed with these brackets. And then we create an HTML document. And whenever we open a tag, we also have to close a tag. So this is what is referred to as a tag. It is when you have some kind of text inside of a less than and greater than sign, and then you close it with a less than and greater than sign. You'll be seeing a lot of this inside of HTML. So then we need to add the head of our document. And this is where we'll add things like the title. And then we will need to add the body. And the body is where the actual content will live that gets displayed on the page. So let's go ahead and create our first paragraph. So to create a paragraph, we need to add the paragraph tag. So we will say P and then we'll say hello world. And now if I save this and we go back to that page, you'll probably see that this is going to look exactly the same. But if we were to open up developer tools and go to elements, this is actually structured like a correct HTML web page. So just like that, we've created our first HTML web page with proper syntax. So learning HTML is all about learning these tags. So we have this paragraph tag, and then we also have heading tags. So we can say H1, hello there. And remember, we close the tag anytime we open a tag. So here we have a heading 1 tag. I can save that and reload, and now you can see that it shows as larger text. We can then go back, we have H1, H2, H3, and all the way up to H6, and they're just different levels of headings. We also have multiple different things like lists. So we have headings, we have paragraphs, and then we can also have a list. So maybe we want to have like a list of maybe groceries. So UL stands for unordered list. And then inside of the unordered list, we have list items. So as you can see, everything that we're opening, we're also closing. So we open this unordered list, we close the unordered list. And same with the list item, we opened it and closed it. So maybe we want to add eggs, milk, and cheese. So now you can see I just created a list of grocery items. And if I were to save that, go back here and reload, you can see that we get a list of eggs, milk, and cheese. Next up, we can also add some links to our page if we wanted. So I could add a link by using the A tag. And inside of here, I will say add grocery item. So if I save that, we go back here and reload, you can see that we have a link, but it actually doesn't show up as a link in here. And that's because we need to give our A tag an attribute. And an attribute is simply additional text that we can use to add to our tag that will give it some more functionality. So in here, I'm going to say href equals, and I'm going to provide a link. And I'm just going to put a link to Google right here. So if I were to save that and go back here and reload, now you can see that it actually looks like a link. So there are a ton more of these attributes that we can add that we will go over here shortly. But next, let's move on to images. So to add an image to a page, we can say image source. So you can see that we're also using an attribute for our image tag. And the unique thing about an image tag is it doesn't require a closing tag. So you may find a few of these inside of HTML that some elements do not require it to be closed. It simply closes itself. So inside of this source, we need to actually provide the source of the image. So let's find an image from images.google. Let's just say funny dog. And this guy looks good. Okay, so I want to open this image in a new tab. And that's kind of a weird image. Let's take a look at this guy. Open image in new tab. Yeah, we can see it has the .jpg extension. I'm going to copy that and put that right there. Let me zoom out just a little bit and go back here, reload our page, and now you can see that we have this picture of the dog. So we just went over headings, paragraphs, lists, links, and images. And there are about 3 more elements that I want to cover. So one is the table element. So sometimes you will see things inside of a table on a web page. So you can do that by saying table, and then inside of our table we have rows. So I'll say table row. And then inside of each row, we have table data. Say I am some data. And I can just copy this and paste that like that. Okay, so if I save that, we go back here and reload, you can see that we have some table data. And I can actually add a border to this table. If I reload, you can see that we now have a border around this table. So I could possibly have another table data item here. Let's change the text a little bit. I am more data. That didn't really change it much. Oh well. Okay, so we save that, we reload, and now you can see that the table data right here has 2 columns, and then we have 3 rows. So that is the basics of a table element. Sometimes you want to use a table so you can have a nice layout of data. Next, I want to talk about a div element. So a div element is just an element that you can use for anything. You can create a box, you could create a circle if you wanted. It's simply used for any kind of container. So we can just say div, and inside here I can just add some text. So I save that and reload. It doesn't really look like much, and that's because we haven't added any styles or added any attributes to this div. But what you can do with div elements is you can maybe float some left and float some right. And then I just kind of wanted to point this out. We'll go into more detail once we start learning some CSS here shortly. So just know that div elements are simply just a container that you can wrap anything in. Next up is the form element. So we have a form, and this has a few attributes that we can add to it, such as action, which is where we want this to post to. So we can say where we want the form to post to, and we'll just have it post to itself. And then we have the method, and this is whether it is a post or a get. And I think the scope of the get and the post might be a little bit beyond this video, but we'll just say a get request. And inside of this form, we can have multiple input elements. So I can have an input of text, and I can say that I want this to have a name of name and a placeholder of name. And then let's go ahead and add a button. So if I save that, we go back here, we reload. You can see now that we have this new form. Oh, and I forgot to add something there. Or actually, we have an extra bracket. So let me go ahead and just comment out our list and our image. Okay, so now if I reload, you can see that form right here. So we can say hello, and click on submit, and you can see that the GET request actually passes the name that I just typed in here. So you can see that it changes right there, and we can use this data once we learn a backend programming language to capture the data that the user just posted and then do whatever we want with that data. Okay, so that is the very, very basics of HTML. HTML is all about learning these tags and how you can use them in your web page. So let's go over a brief summary of what we just learned. So we learned about heading tags, which we can do H1 through H6, and that will just give us a large heading text. We also learned about paragraph tags, where we can add a paragraph to our page. And then we learned about our lists. So this was our list where we added a grocery list of eggs, milk, and cheese. And then we also learned about links. So links will take you from one page to another. And then we had images. So HTML images will display an image on the page. It's very self-explanatory. Then we have tables that we explained. We talked about divs, which are just containers that can store anything. And then we also have our form elements. Oh, and it looks like actually I had a closing div here, and this would be improper HTML. I would need to actually close that with a form tag. And there are multiple input types that you can learn to use, such as type text, type checkbox. There's also some drop downs that you can use as well. But we just wanted to cover the very basics of HTML. And next, let's move on to learning some CSS. Okay, now let's learn a little bit of CSS. So I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop and just call this CSS. And I will open this up in my editor and create a new file called index.html. And I'm going to give this a basic HTML structure and then add a paragraph to my body tag. And I'm just going to say CSS is awesome. Okay, so there are 3 ways that you can add CSS to your HTML page. The first way is to add an inline style. So this is actually adding an attribute called style. And we can say that we want the style to have a property, which is the color, and we want the color to have a value of, we'll say, blue in this case. So if I save this, we can go ahead and open this up, and you can see that our text is indeed blue. So this is one way to include style inside of your page. Now let's say that we duplicated this, and then what if we made a change to the color here? We said white, and then we wanted the background to be blue. So if we save that and we go back here and reload, you can now see that the background is blue and the text is white. So then if we wanted all of our paragraphs to look the same, we would then have to copy all of these styles and paste it in here again. So instead of doing that over and over again, there is a simpler way that we can add styles to elements that they can be applied to every single element. So this was inline styles. We can also add internal styles. So that would be adding a style tag to the head of our document. And then we can say for all paragraphs, so the P tag, we then have a open curly brace and a closing curly brace. And inside of here, we can add these properties and values. So if I paste that in there and just remove the inline styles. So now I can save that, go back here and reload, and you can see that the style gets applied to both paragraphs. If I were then to change the background to green and we reload, you can see that that style gets applied as well. So those are 2 ways to include CSS in your page. We had inline and internal. And the last way, which is the most common, is to include an external style sheet. So we will do that by adding a link tag to our head, and this has a rel equals style sheet, and href is going to be the place where we store the location of our CSS file. So I'm going to say that I want my CSS file to be in the same directory as my index.html, and I want to call it style.css. So let's create that file. Okay, so now we have our style.css and our index.html, which includes this style.css. So now I can say that I want all the paragraphs to have a color of white and a background. Let's change that to red. And let's reload, and now you can see that that gets applied as well. So those are the three ways that you can include CSS in your HTML: is inline, internal, and external. Now that we know how to include CSS in our page, let's learn a little bit about all of these different styles that we can add to our page. So the HTML is the structure of our page, and the CSS is the styles that get applied to the structure of our page. So inside of our style.css, we have our paragraph tag, and we have the color white and background red. So the color is what is referred to as the property, and the white is what is called the value. So every single property has a specific value. And CSS is really about learning all these different properties and the values associated with them to make your HTML page look really nice. So let's play around with a few more properties. So I'm going to say that I want the font size to be 100 pixels. Let me save that and reload. Now you can see that that font size is really large. Next, we can say font style. Maybe I want this to be italic. You can save that and reload, and now you can see that it is italic. So there are a ton of different font properties, background properties, and color properties that you can use inside of your CSS. We're only going to cover just the very basics in here, and you'll have to go on and learn about every single property and value. And the place that I usually recommend to most people is W3 Schools. So if you go to w3schools.com, you can click here to learn HTML and learn CSS, and they also have a learn JavaScript. So if you go to the learn CSS, you will find out about all of these properties and the associated values. So let's jump back over to our project and have a little bit more fun. So I'm going to create a new div, and I'm going to add some text inside of it. So inside of my style, I'm going to say for every single div element, I want it to have a property of width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels. And let's give it a green background. So let me save that. We'll go back here and reload. And now you can see that we have this box right here. And let me take this font size away because that is really big. Okay, so now you can see that we have this box right here in front of us, and we just applied some styles to this div. So one thing that I do want to tell you about is identifiers and classes, or IDs and classes. So we can add an ID to this div so that way we can reference this specific div itself. Because you can see if we were to create another div right below it, all of the styles are going to be applied to that div as well. So what we can do is we can specify a unique identifier. So I can say ID equals box. So right here, I want to change this to hash, and that's how we reference an ID. I'm going to say box. I want to apply those styles only to an ID of box. So if I go back here and reload, you can see that those styles only got applied to that specific div. So let's say, for instance, then that we wanted to have multiple divs. We wouldn't use the ID box because ID should be unique for the document. You should never have the same identifier in one document. Instead, in that case, you would use what is called a class. So if we have a class, instead of using the hash sign, we actually use the dot symbol. So now if we use that and we reload, you can see that the style gets applied to both of these div with a class of box. And you can also see how they are right on top of each other. Let's add a little bit of spacing. So here we can add some margin. I can say 10 pixels. And now you can see that it has some spacing around the box. Then we can also add some padding. And the padding will add some spacing inside of the box. So you can see that the padding is inside and the margin is spacing outside. Then we could also apply a property called border, and maybe we want to give it a border of 2 pixels. We want it to be solid, and we want it to have a color of red. So let's reload that, and you can see now that we have this border around each of our boxes. So just a few more properties that I want to cover. I also want to cover the float property. So maybe we want the boxes, instead of them being vertically stacked, maybe I want them to be laid out horizontally. If I add this float left, they will both be floating left and they will be horizontally aligned as opposed to vertically aligned. Next, I want to talk about a property called position, and by default, all elements have a position of relative, which just means that wherever they are at inside of the HTML document is where they will be displayed. So we have position relative, and that looks exactly the same. There's another one that's called position absolute, and this is saying that I want this element to be positioned specifically where I tell it to. So I can say I want this to be positioned absolute, and I want it to be positioned at the top of 0 pixels and left of 0 pixels. So if I were to save that and reload, now you can see that it actually gets positioned at top 0, left 0. You can see that it has a little bit of spacing up on the top and the left, and that's because we have our margin. So let's just set that back to relative, or we could just completely remove these properties. So that is just the very basics of CSS. Like I said, I would recommend going over to W3 Schools, learning all about these properties and values and how you can apply them to your HTML to make it look a lot nicer. I would also recommend maybe just checking out a website and seeing how their things are laid out, and maybe even try copying that and try replicating that, because the key to mastering your skill is going to be all about practice. You're going to want to practice and practice, and you are just going to get better and better, and your websites are going to look nicer and nicer as well. Okay, so now that we have HTML and CSS down, let's learn a bit about JavaScript. Okay, now let's learn how we can add some interactivity to our pages by learning some JavaScript. So I'm just going to create another new folder on my desktop called JavaScript and move this into my editor. And again, I'm going to create another file called index.html with a basic HTML structure. Okay, so I'm also going to add another div and give that an ID of box. And now there are two ways that we can add JavaScript to our page, similar to CSS. We can add our JavaScript internal, so I can add some script tags right here, and I can do something called console log hello. So the console log will actually print out a message inside of our developer tools. Let me show you what the developer tools looks like. So if I open up the page, you can see that we don't have anything on the page, but if I open up developer tools with Command-Shift-I, or you can go up here and go to more tools and say developer tools. So I want to go to the console, and you can see now that we have this message printed out right here called hello. So that is one way to include JavaScript inside of our HTML file. We can also include an external script similar to CSS. So I can say script, and I want this source to load script.js from our current directory. So now I need to create that file, script.js, and I will say console log JavaScript is rad. So save that, going back here, reload, and now you can see that we get the output, JavaScript is rad. So using console log, we can easily output content to the console, and it'll help us debug our app and maybe even get the contents of certain variables. So with that said, variables is something that we will talk about first. So you can create a variable and store any type of value in it. So a variable is essentially a container that can store a number. So we can store the value of 10 inside of number. We could also store a string. And we could also store a Boolean value. So we could say is rad equals true. Now let's say that we want to add this string right here to actually be displayed on our page, because as you can see, our page doesn't do much. So let's say that we want to store hello there inside of our ID box. So we can do that by calling document, and we want to get the document, and then we want to get an element by ID, and that ID is box, and we want to set the inner HTML to be equal to string. So if I save that and reload, you can see that it actually gets added to that div. So you can see right here inside of our ID box is the text hello there. So we can add text. We could also add this number instead, and we could also do some arithmetic. So maybe we wanted to add 5 to number. So we could save that and reload, and now we get the value of 15. So you can do all kinds of math, arithmetic, comparison operators inside of JavaScript. Additionally, we can run conditionals in JavaScript. So we can say if a condition is met, we want to do scenario A, otherwise we want to do scenario B. So let's go ahead and create an if statement. So we'll say if number is equal to 10, then we want to console log, yeah buddy. We can say else console log, nope. Okay, so if we save that, go back here, reload and go to our console, you can see that we get the output, yeah buddy. And if we were to set the value to, let's say 5, and we reload this, you can see that we get the value of nope. And the cool thing about JavaScript is you can actually run all this JavaScript right here inside of your browser. So I could create a new variable and call this age equals 21. And now I can say if age is greater than or equal to 21, we can console log you can buy beer. So you can see that that got output. So you can do a lot of programming in JavaScript right here directly inside of your console. Next, let's talk about loops. So every good application has loops. So a loop essentially runs through a certain piece of code a certain amount of times. So let's create our first for loop. So I'm going to create a for loop and I'm going to say var I is equal to 0. And the condition that we want to meet that we keep on running through this loop is we want I to be less than 10. But each time we run through the loop, we want I to increment by 1. So now let's go ahead and just console log the value of I. So if I save that, we go back here and reload, you can see that we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you can use loops to loop through functionality in your application, loop through arrays and objects. Since we're talking about arrays, let me go ahead and show you how this would work. So let me create a new array, which is called groceries. And the array, you use the bracket notation. And inside of here, maybe I want to store the value of milk. We'll say eggs and cheese. Okay, so maybe we want to loop through each of these grocery items and display them on the screen. So I can do that by saying for var I equal to 0, and instead of I less than 10, I actually want I to be less than, we'll say groceries.length. And that is the total length of the array, which in this case is going to be 3. So then we want to print out groceries, and we want that to print out at location I. So for the first time through, it's going to print out at 0, 1, and then 2. So if we save this, we go back here and reload, you can now see that we get each of these items displayed on the screen. Okay, and next let's talk about functions. So a function you can think of like a machine, like you put something in and you usually get something out, or you press a button to start that machine and then something comes out. So in this case, we are going to just create a function and we will just call this list groceries. So inside of here, I'm going to add my for loop. So if I were to add that, I click on save and we come back here and reload, you're going to see that we don't get any output because even though we have our function here, we're actually not calling it. So we need to call our function. So here I'm going to say list groceries. And if I save that and we reload, now we get the output because we called our function. So functions make it very useful to create functionality that you're going to use over and over again. You can simply call the function and use it multiple times throughout your application. Okay, and before wrapping up this video, there's one last thing that I want to talk about, which is event listeners. So let's say that anytime we click on this box right here, I'm going to add some text here. We want to maybe alert the user about something. So what we can do is we can add an event listener. So we can say document.getElementById. We want to get that box and we want to add an event listener. So we want to say once that element is clicked, we want to run this specific function. So let's just alert to the user, I got clicked. So let me save that, go back here and reload, and now let's click on the box. And you can see that we get this alert right here. So you will use these event listeners throughout your application to create functionality when users click, when users hover, whenever any kind of functionality happens in your application, you'll be using these event listeners quite a bit. So that is just a basic overview of JavaScript. You just learned HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in a really short amount of time. And like I said, you will probably want to go to W3 schools and you'll want to go through each of these tutorials and learn inside of HTML all the different elements that you can use. With CSS, you'll want to learn about all the properties and values. And JavaScript, you will want to learn about all the different types of variables that you can create, the different functions that you can create. And like I said, it's all about practice. So you just practice, 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 and you're really going to hone in on your skills and just get so much better at your craft. So I really hope that this video has helped you. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comment section below. And happy coding, and I hope that you will continue to learn more about web development because it is going to show to be valuable in any area of your career. Hey, thanks again for watching my video. If you do want to learn how to create your own software as a service, after you have learned web design and you've learned a little bit about PHP and Laravel, which I do have tutorials for each of those languages, you'll want to head over to saasadventure.io. And this is where you can sign up for our 21-day program and you can learn how to create your own software as a service. It's actually a lot of fun. Each day that you complete, you will get a new badge inside of your user area and you will learn all kinds of cool technologies. So make sure to head on over to saasadventure.io to start creating your software as a service.